Ex-Marine takes control of abandoned orbital station. Secrets of a forbidden alliance revealed. Captain Jack Reeve was no stranger to danger. A decorated Marine who had fought in countless wars across the galaxy. He had seen it all, from planetary invasions to covert operations in deep space. But nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead when he stumbled upon an abandoned orbital station floating in the void. It had been years since the last known crew had vanished without a trace. The station, known as Arcadia 9, had been a vital research outpost for the United Earth Coalition, UEC. However, one day, it had simply gone dark, its communications severed, and its inhabitants lost. A black mark on the UEC's history that no one had ever fully explained. Jack, now a retired ex-Marine, had been drifting aimlessly through the system, looking for a purpose after leaving behind the life of warfare, when a distress beacon from Arcadia 9 suddenly blared to life on his ship's console. He couldn't resist. The message was faint, cryptic, but it was enough to draw him in. A part of him, the soldier who never fully gave up, needed to know what happened. He docked his vessel at the long-abandoned station, the silence pressing in around him like a weight. The airlock hissed as the ancient door slid open. Inside, the station was eerily still, dust drifting in the zero-gravity chambers. The once pristine walls were now covered in grime, and the glowing lights flickered with intermittent sputtering. But what caught Jack's attention was something far more sinister than mere abandonment. He accessed the main console and began running diagnostics. The system had been hacked, not just by any intruder, but by someone with deep knowledge of the station's systems. As he dug deeper into the logs, a chilling revelation began to take shape. Hidden files, encrypted, disguised as system updates, began to unravel. The station hadn't been abandoned. The crew hadn't vanished into the unknown. They had been erased. A covert operation had been carried out by the UEC, and the truth behind it had been buried. But Jack wasn't one to shy away from uncomfortable truths. He had uncovered evidence of a forbidden alliance, an agreement between the UEC and a shadowy faction known as the Syndicate of the Lost Stars. The Syndicate had long been considered a myth, a group of rogue scientists and former military leaders who had turned against the UEC, operating outside the law, and experimenting with dangerous technologies. The alliance between the UEC and the Syndicate was supposed to be a secret, a deal forged in the darkest corners of the galaxy. They were developing weapons that could alter the balance of power in the universe, weapons capable of wiping out entire fleets with a single strike. The crew of Arcadia 9 had discovered the truth about the Syndicate's experiments. They had tried to expose it, to warn the UEC. In response, the UEC had silenced them, erased the station, and erased their existence from history. All records of the Alliance were wiped clean. Jack was holding the only surviving evidence, the data logs that could bring everything to light. But Jack's discovery didn't go unnoticed. As he accessed the final encryption key, an alarm blared throughout the station. The station's defense systems, still operational after all these years, activated, and Jack felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He wasn't alone on Arcadia 9. Someone else had come to claim the secrets he had uncovered. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, a woman, cloaked in a sleek, black combat suit, her face obscured by a visor. She moved with the grace of a predator, her eyes locking onto Jack's with a cold intensity. "You shouldn't have come here, Captain," she said, her voice low and unyielding. "You've uncovered something that was never meant to be found. Now, you'll have to die with it." Jack's heart raced, but his training kicked in. He had faced impossible odds before. He wasn't going to let some ghost of a past mission stop him from exposing the truth. "Not happening," he replied, his hand reaching for the sidearm holstered at his hip. The two of them locked eyes in that fleeting moment, an ex-Marine and a mysterious operative from the Syndicate. A battle of wills, both understanding the stakes at hand. The truth of the Forbidden Alliance would either be Jack's final victory or his death sentence. As the tension built, the cold void of space outside Arcadia 9 seemed to pulse, alive with the potential for catastrophe. There were no allies here, no reinforcements, just Jack and the secrets of the stars. This time, the fight was personal, and Jack Reeve was ready to expose the UEC's darkest secret to the galaxy, even if it meant going against everyone he once fought for. Ex-Marine takes control of abandoned orbital station. Secrets of a Forbidden Alliance revealed. Part 2. The woman's silhouette was barely discernible in the dim glow of the station's failing lights. The sound of her boots clicking against the metal floor echoed through the airless corridors of Arcadia 9 as she approached, her every movement calculated and deliberate. Jack had little time. The encrypted files he had just accessed were the key to everything. The truth behind the Syndicate's experiments, the UEC's covert operations, and the crew's untimely fate. But the woman was determined to make sure that truth never saw the light of day. She was no ordinary soldier. And this wasn't just a matter of survival for her. It was about erasing a dangerous past that threatened the very foundations of the galaxy's power structure. She raised her arm, and the dark metallic gauntlet on her wrist flashed as she activated the station's security systems. The walls hummed with life as ancient drones sprung to life, their targeting systems locking onto Jack. The pressure was mounting. The door to the control room slammed shut behind him with a deafening clang, trapping him inside. He needed a way out, and fast. "Why the hell are you doing this?" Jack's voice broke the silence, his tone sharp. "You're not just some mercenary. You know what they were doing here. Don't pretend like you don't have blood on your hands." The woman's gaze was cold, unwavering. "You don't know the full story, Captain. There are things you wouldn't understand. The Syndicate was born out of necessity. What they created, it's beyond the UEC's comprehension." Jack gritted his teeth. "Necessity? You're talking about mass destruction on an unprecedented scale. The UEC can't control the weapons the Syndicate's been building. You and your kind are creating a monster." Her lips curled into a grim smile. "You've been trained to fight, Captain, not to think. There's a reason they erased the records. There's a reason you're not supposed to know the truth. But I'll give you one thing, you're stubborn. And that's going to be your downfall." The station's lights flickered again, casting shadows across the room. Jack's fingers hovered over his sidearm, ready to draw. But he wasn't foolish enough to believe this would be a simple confrontation. The moment he fired, the drones would close in. He needed a plan. "You've already lost," she continued, her voice now a taunting whisper. "You can't stop the chain reaction. The weapons we've developed here, they're beyond the UEC's reach now. We've found a way to harness the energy of collapsing stars, Captain. A weapon that can wipe out entire fleets in the blink of an eye. The universe will never be the same." The magnitude of her words sent a shiver down Jack's spine. The Syndicate had gone too far. The UEC, for all its corruption and bureaucracy, had still maintained a balance of power. But what the Syndicate was creating could tear the galaxy apart. There were no checks, no accountability. If this weapon fell into the wrong hands, it would mean the end of civilization as they knew it. "I'm not leaving here until the truth is out," Jack said, his voice low, but with a determination that surprised even him. "The galaxy needs to know what's been going on, what you've been hiding." The woman's face twisted in frustration. "It's too late for that. There are forces beyond your comprehension now. The UEC won't stop us. The Syndicate controls the future. You can't even see it yet." She lunged, her hand shooting out to grab Jack by the collar. In that split second, Jack instinctively dropped to the floor, sweeping his leg under hers. The woman stumbled, but she quickly regained her footing, pulling out a sleek, black blade from her hip. The edge hummed with a faint electrical charge. Jack pulled his gun free, but the woman was already in motion, circling him. The drones were closing in, their red targeting lasers pinning Jack to the center of the room. He had no choice now, he had to act fast. With a shout, Jack rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a slash from her blade. He fired at the nearest drone, causing it to explode in a burst of sparks. But there were more, dozens of them, swarming the room like vultures. The woman launched herself at him, her blade coming down in a swift arc. Jack sidestepped just in time, grabbing her wrist and twisting it behind her back. He slammed her against the control console. But she wasn't finished yet. She kicked out, knocking his feet out from under him, and in one fluid motion, she was on top of him. "You really think you can stop all of this?" she hissed, pressing the edge of the blade against his throat. "The Syndicate is unstoppable." Jack's hand found the control panel next to him, his fingers smashing the emergency override button. The station's system sputtered, causing the woman to pause, her eyes narrowing. With a sudden burst of energy, Jack pushed her off him, rolling to his feet and pointing his weapon directly at her. "You're right about one thing," Jack said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. The syndicate is unstoppable, but so am I. With a swift motion, he activated a self-destruct sequence on the station's main reactor. The countdown began. The woman's eyes widened in panic. "You fool! You think you can destroy all of this?" she screamed. "You'll die with us." Jack's expression was steely. "Maybe, but at least the truth will survive." The woman hesitated for a moment, her hands trembling. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Jack turned and sprinted for the nearest escape pod, the countdown echoing in his ears. The station's walls began to tremble, groaning under the strain of the initiated sequence. The woman was right behind him, but Jack knew she wouldn't make it. As he climbed into the escape pod and jettisoned himself from Arcadia 9, the station's massive reactors exploded in a blinding burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the dark void of space. Jack watched the flames consume the station as he drifted farther and farther away. The files, the proof of the UEC's darkest secrets, were safe for now. The galaxy would know the truth, and no matter how hard they tried to bury it, the syndicate would never be able to hide behind their lies again. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Jack Reeve wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. Ex-Marine takes control of abandoned orbital station. Secrets of a Forbidden Alliance revealed. Part 3. The escape pod's engines hummed gently as it drifted through the cold emptiness of space, its automated systems keeping it on course toward the nearest inhabited system. Jack Reeve sat strapped into the cramped cockpit, the weight of his actions settling on him like an anchor. The explosion that had obliterated Arcadia 9 was still visible in his mind's eye, the flash of light as the station had gone up in flames, taking its secrets with it, but not completely. The data he'd managed to download before the self-destruct sequence activated was enough. It was a sliver of the truth, but it was a sliver that could bring down empires. His pulse raced as the reality of what he had done sank in. The syndicate was still out there, and their ambitions hadn't been thwarted. Arcadia 9 was gone, but the weapons they had developed were still in play, still somewhere out in the dark corners of the galaxy. Jack wasn't naive enough to think he could take them down alone, but he was sure of one thing: the galaxy had to know what was happening behind the scenes, and he was going to make sure of it. The comm system crackled to life. "Captain Reeve?" A voice interrupted his thoughts, slightly distorted by static. Jack's hand instinctively reached for the comm panel. "Go ahead. I'm Admiral Klein. We've been tracking your pod. Your ship's logs came through, along with the files you've retrieved. We need to talk. Now." Jack's pulse quickened. Admiral Klein was a high-ranking officer in the UEC, someone with enough power to both help and hinder his plans. He had no idea if Klein would be on his side. But one thing was certain: the Admiral had known something about the syndicate, and now it seemed like he was ready to confront the truth. "Send me coordinates, Admiral. I'll be there shortly." Klein's voice softened, almost as though he was reluctant to speak. "We'll send you the coordinates, but be careful, Captain. You're not the only one hunting these secrets. There are others who don't want the galaxy to know the truth." The comm clicked off, leaving Jack alone in the silence of the pod once more. He felt the weight of his next move pressing heavily on him. The battle for truth had only just begun. The syndicate wasn't the only force out there willing to fight dirty to keep their secrets intact. Hours later, Jack's pod entered the gravitational pull of a remote station in the outer rim of the galaxy, where Admiral Klein's ship, USS Horizon, was waiting. The station was a haven for ex-soldiers, freelancers, and mercenaries, a place where alliances were fragile and trust even more so. It was the kind of place that could give Jack the anonymity he needed, and also the firepower he might require. As Jack descended the landing ramp of his pod, he was greeted by the steely gaze of Admiral Klein himself, flanked by two of his aides. Klein, in his late 40s, looked like a man who had been to hell and back a few times. His uniform was immaculate, but there was an edge to his demeanor that suggested he didn't entirely trust Jack, or perhaps anyone. "You're a hard man to get a hold of, Reeve," Klein said, his voice low, "but you did the right thing. I didn't think you'd actually pull it off." Jack didn't bother with pleasantries. He knew Klein was playing a dangerous game. "I didn't come here for compliments. I came because you know something about the syndicate. I need to know what you're really involved in." Klein studied him for a long moment, then motioned for him to follow. The halls of the station were quiet, almost too quiet. They passed through corridors lined with digital screens flashing encrypted data and closed doors leading into secure rooms. As they entered Klein's private office, the Admiral keyed in a security code and a holo display popped up between them. The screen revealed a map of the galaxy, with certain systems marked in red, ones that had been affected by syndicate activity. Jack leaned closer, scanning the display. Klein looked at him, his face grim. This map is just the tip of the iceberg, Reeve. The syndicate has been manipulating governments, corporations, and military factions for years. They've been developing weapons of mass destruction on a scale that would make even the UEC's most secretive projects look like toys. Jack folded his arms, keeping his tone even. And you knew about it? Or did you just turn a blind eye? Klein's expression hardened. It's not that simple. The syndicate isn't just a terrorist group. They've got their hands in everything. We couldn't take them down without collateral damage. And some of us, well, we didn't think the cost was worth it. You're telling me you let this happen? Jack's voice rose, a cold fury filling him. You've been letting these monsters build weapons that can wipe out entire fleets. And you didn't think it was worth stopping? Klein's eyes narrowed. It wasn't a matter of whether it was worth stopping, Reeve. It's about who controls it. If we'd taken action, we'd be fighting the syndicate and their allies, with a target on our backs. The UEC's resources are stretched thin, and we can't afford another war. Jack shook his head. So, you've been complicit all this time. Klein didn't flinch. Sometimes you do what you have to do to survive. There was a long, tense silence. Jack's mind raced, processing the implications. Klein's words were chilling, but they confirmed what he had suspected all along. The UEC had been compromised. Just like everything else in the galaxy, no one could be trusted, not fully. Finally, Jack spoke again. The syndicate is still out there, Admiral. They haven't stopped. They've got new weapons, and they're not going to stop until they've wiped out every resistance force in the galaxy. Klein's eyes darkened. I know, and we need to stop them, but it won't be easy. They've infiltrated too many systems, too many factions. We'll need more than just a few ex-Marines and a handful of ships to take them down. We'll need an army. Jack paused. Then I'll give you the proof you need. The files I've got can expose the entire operation. But we need to be ready. If we don't act fast, they'll keep building. Klein nodded. I've already got a few contacts who can help. We'll gather a team. But this isn't just about stopping a single faction anymore, Reeve. This is about the future of the galaxy. Jack gave a short, grim smile. Then let's make sure the future isn't controlled by the syndicate. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. But one thing was clear. Jack Reeve wasn't in this fight alone anymore. And now, with the proof in his hands, he had a chance to tear down the empire of lies the syndicate had built. It was time for the galaxy to know the truth. The war for the galaxy's soul was just beginning. Ex-Marine takes control of abandoned orbital station. Secrets of a Forbidden Alliance revealed. Part 4. The shadows of the galaxy were closing in. Jack Reeve, once a soldier bound by duty and honor, had become an unwitting harbinger of the galaxy's dark truths. As he stared out from the bridge of the USS Horizon, the enormity of the task ahead was dawning on him. Admiral Klein had already begun gathering resources, a mix of military operatives, mercenaries, and defectors from the UEC, but the odds were still stacked against them. The syndicate, with its vast network of influence, wasn't going to go down without a fight. Klein entered the bridge, his usually calm demeanor now tinged with urgency. We've confirmed several syndicate strongholds on the fringe systems, but they've grown smarter, more elusive. The weapons they've been developing are more advanced than we anticipated. If we don't move quickly, we could be facing a new kind of war. Jack turned from the viewport, his mind focused. I don't care about their weapons. We need to expose them, the syndicate's power base, their leaders, their secret deals with the UEC. Once the galaxy knows who's really pulling the strings, we'll have a shot at stopping them. Klein's eyes narrowed. You think exposing them will be enough? We're not talking about a simple coup. These people control vast resources. Their influence stretches farther than you realize. Reeve, if we don't hit them hard and fast, they'll have us running before we even get started. Jack didn't flinch. He'd seen the same fears reflected in the eyes of countless officers before him. People were afraid of the unknown, of what would happen when the truth finally emerged. But Jack knew that fear was the enemy now, not the syndicate. I'm not interested in just fighting. We need to expose them. If the people know what the syndicate has been doing, the weapons they've been building, the systems they've infiltrated, the galaxy will turn on them, Jack said, his voice cold with certainty. They won't be able to hide anymore. Klein considered this, then nodded. You're right, but we'll need a plan, a solid one. The plan, as it turned out, was as audacious as it was dangerous. The first step was to infiltrate a syndicate stronghold on the edge of the Perseus system. A remote mining colony had been turned into a research facility, the perfect cover for their darkest experiments. It was a critical piece of the syndicate's operations, and Jack and Klein agreed that if they could take it down, they could disrupt the flow of weapons manufacturing and sabotage the syndicate's plans. The team assembled at the briefing room aboard the USS Horizon. Klein had brought in some of the galaxy's most talented operatives, Miko Tanaka, a former UEC intelligence officer with a knack for hacking, Commander Eric Drake, a decorated Special Forces soldier who specialized in extraction missions, and Dr. Elena Voss, a weapons specialist who had defected from the syndicate years ago. Together, they made up the core of the mission. Jack stood at the front of the room, his eyes scanning each member of the team. The mission was dangerous, but they all knew what was at stake. The syndicate's grip on the galaxy was tightening, and it was up to them to loosen it. We're going in quiet, Jack said, his voice low and commanding. We need to extract as much information as we can. Destroy the facility if we have to, but make sure the data we gather gets to the right people. Drake, who had a reputation for getting in and out of hostile zones undetected, spoke up. I've already mapped the location. It's an industrial complex, heavily guarded. There are 3 entry points, but only one of them is clear enough for an insertion. We'll need to take out their security grid first. Miko Tanaka nodded, already pulling up a holographic map of the facility on the table. I can hack their systems from the outside, disable cameras, sensors, and communications. But I'll need time. If they catch on to what we're doing, they'll lock everything down. We'll be exposed. Dr. Voss, who had been quiet until now, adjusted her glasses and spoke up. We'll also need to look for any experimental weapons they've been developing. If there's a prototype we can find, it could give us leverage. The syndicate's not just building bombs. They're working on new technologies. We need to see what they're up to. Klein, ever the strategist, took his turn. We move fast. We move hard. We hit them like a hammer, then disappear before they can retaliate. This is about creating enough chaos to give the rest of the galaxy the chance to see the syndicate for what they really are. Jack nodded, satisfied with the plan. Everyone's clear on their objectives? The team nodded in unison. Then let's get to work. The USS Horizon dropped out of hyperspace near the Perseus system, and the team quickly boarded their stealth shuttle for the final approach. The facility loomed ahead, a massive complex carved into the side of a rocky moon, with heavy guard patrols circling the perimeter. The mission was simple: break in, gather intel, and sabotage their operations. But, as with every mission Jack had been a part of, nothing was ever truly simple. As they descended into the complex, Miko's fingers danced over her hollow interface, sending pulses of data into the syndicate's network. The outside lights flickered briefly before going dark, signaling the beginning of their infiltration. Systems are offline, Miko confirmed, her voice tight with focus. They won't know we're here for the next 5 minutes. After that, it's a scramble. Drake, armed and ready, led the way through a maintenance hatch that took them deep into the belly of the facility. The air was cold and sterile, a reminder of the clinical nature of the syndicate's operations. They moved in silence, the hum of the station's machines the only sound as they advanced. Soon, they reached the core of the facility, where the syndicate's most secretive projects were stored. Dr. Voss went straight to a lab console, her eyes scanning the readouts. This is it, she muttered. They've been experimenting with quantum-level weapons, some kind of singularity-based technology. It's not just a weapon, it's a whole new class of destruction. Jack's blood ran cold. The implications were terrifying. These weren't just weapons of mass destruction. These were weapons that could destabilize entire systems, perhaps even entire star systems. We need to blow this place sky high, Drake said, his voice low and urgent. Before Jack could respond, The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. A security team was closing in. Their time had just run out. Move. Now, Jack barked. The team sprinted toward the extraction point, only to be met by a force far larger than anticipated. Syndicate operatives flooded the corridor, their weapons raised. There was no time for hesitation. A firefight erupted. Jack's pulse raced as he returned fire, taking down 2 operatives in a quick series of shots. The team moved with precision, but the syndicate was well prepared, and the odds were quickly tipping in their favor. Jack knew they had only minutes before the whole facility was locked down, and their mission would end in failure. "Fall back to the shuttle," he shouted, grabbing Miko and pulling her toward the exit. The team retreated under heavy fire, but with each step, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was only just beginning. The syndicate was a shadow, and even as they moved to escape, Jack knew that no matter how hard they fought, they wouldn't be able to outrun the darkness, not until the truth came to light. And the truth was a weapon that no one was truly prepared for. Ex-Marine takes control of abandoned orbital station. Secrets of a Forbidden Alliance revealed. Part 5. The escape shuttle blasted through the facility's atmosphere, rocketing away from the syndicate stronghold just as the first tremors of an explosion shook the ground beneath them. Jack's hand gripped the edge of the shuttle's co-pilot seat, his knuckles white. The mission had been a success. The data they had stolen was more than they had hoped for, revealing an intricate web of syndicate operations stretching from one end of the galaxy to the other. But the escape was too close. They were lucky to make it out with their lives. The explosion that had been set to destroy the research facility had done more than just sabotage the syndicate's weapons development. It had triggered a ripple effect, a chain reaction of failures that began to collapse parts of the facility. As the shuttle sped away, the facility's central core erupted in a brilliant, deadly flash, sending debris spiraling out into space. Jack looked back through the shuttle's rearview port, the once impregnable fortress now a smoldering ruin. Miko Tanaka was already going over the stolen data, her fingers flying over the terminal. This is huge," she muttered, her voice tense. "I've never seen anything like this before. They've got entire fleets in development, Jack. Weapons that can reshape the balance of power in the galaxy." Dr. Voss leaned over, her expression unreadable as she scanned the holo display. "These aren't just weapons of mass destruction, they're tools of domination. Whoever controls these technologies will have the power to dictate the terms of the entire galaxy's future. It's not just about fighting wars anymore. It's about rewriting the rules of power." Klein, who had been silently monitoring the situation from the rear of the shuttle, finally spoke. "We need to get back to USS Horizon. The UEC has to see this. We need to organize a coalition to stop them before they can act on any of this, if they haven't already." Jack nodded, though the reality of their situation gnawed at him. He had always fought wars, but this was something else entirely. The syndicate's ambitions were greater than anything he had ever faced, and now they had the evidence to prove it. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of a precipice, and if they didn't act fast, it could be pushed over the edge. As the USS Horizon entered hyperspace, Jack leaned back in his seat, the hum of the engines providing a brief sense of calm. He closed his eyes for a moment, but the weight of everything hung heavily on him. The syndicate was a powerful enemy, but there were others, too, factions within the UEC who would want to suppress the truth. The corruption ran deep, and there were no guarantees that the files they had gathered wouldn't just disappear into the void, buried under layers of political maneuvering and lies. He had a choice to make: expose everything, risk everything, or walk away. "I've seen this before," Jack muttered, his voice hoarse. "People who get too close to the truth, they get burned." Klein, overhearing, walked up beside him. "You're thinking of the consequences, Reeve, the risk?" "Not just that," Jack replied. "I'm thinking of who will want to bury this. If we give these files to the UEC, they might disappear. If we try to leak them to the public, it'll only be a matter of time before someone silences us. No one's going to let this truth come out easily." Klein's face tightened, but he didn't disagree. "You're right. The power structures we're up against are immense, but we don't have the luxury of turning away. If we don't expose them now, we'll be handing the galaxy over to the syndicate, and we both know what that means." Jack looked at the Admiral, meeting his gaze. "Then what do? We start a war," Klein said simply. Not the kind with guns and ships. A war of information. A war for the truth. We use the data you've secured, and we send it to the galaxy's media networks. We expose every dirty deal, every secret project, every connection they have to the UEC and other factions. We make sure the galaxy knows what they've been doing. Jack clenched his jaw. And if that doesn't work? If they shut us down before we can even make a dent? Then we fight back with everything we have. We've got allies now. Those who want change. And we'll make sure the syndicate never gets a chance to act on their plans. Klein's eyes hardened. This isn't just about stopping a group of terrorists. It's about reshaping the future. But we need to act fast. Back aboard the USS Horizon, Miko and Dr. Voss had already begun crafting a strategy. Their mission wasn't just to broadcast the data to every corner of the galaxy. They also needed to figure out a way to bypass the syndicate's countermeasures, their ability to delete, obscure, and manipulate digital evidence. The stakes had never been higher. Klein had arranged a secret meeting with several key figures in the galaxy's political and military sphere. Those who weren't completely controlled by the syndicate's influence. They would need all the help they could get. But as Jack prepared for the next phase of the mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The syndicate had their eyes everywhere, and even if they couldn't catch them now, they would eventually. Jack, Klein said one evening, his voice low, there's one more thing you need to know. The syndicate isn't just working within the UEC, they've infiltrated other systems, corporations, military factions, rogue states. They've aligned themselves with those who want to destabilize the galaxy. If they have the resources they need, they'll trigger wars across systems to distract everyone while they take full control. Jack stared at him, the weight of the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. You're telling me they've got the entire galaxy ready to tear itself apart? Klein nodded grimly. If we don't stop them now, they'll be able to control everything, and no one will even know who's pulling the strings. Then we burn it all down, Jack said, his voice steady and resolute. We expose them, take them down, and make sure that everyone knows who the real enemy is. It was a simple statement, but it had never been more true. Days later, Jack and the crew of the USS Horizon were ready. They had reached the location where their final move would take place, a covert operation to broadcast the data across the galaxy. From here, there was no going back. The countdown began. Jack stood before the terminal, his team by his side, knowing that every move they made would set off a chain reaction. The syndicate's influence was vast, and it would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone who stood in its way. But this time, they had the upper hand. This time, the truth was their weapon. With a final glance at the team, Jack activated the transmission. The data flooded the galaxy. Across the stars, the truth began to spread. The syndicate's network, once hidden in the shadows, was now exposed for all to see. The galaxy erupted into chaos. But amidst the storm of information, one thing was clear: the fight for the future had only just begun. Ex-Marine takes control of abandoned orbital station. Secrets of a Forbidden Alliance revealed. Part 6. The USS Horizon rocked violently as it surged through the edge of the galaxy. The crew had already initiated the data transmission, the most dangerous decision of their lives. It had been only hours since Jack Reeve had authorized the release, but already the shockwaves were being felt. The syndicate's carefully constructed empire was beginning to unravel, and the galaxy was waking up to the truth. But with every revelation, a storm of retaliation followed. What are we looking at? Jack asked, pacing on the bridge. As Miko Tanaka worked furiously at the terminal, the truth was spreading, but so were the syndicate's retaliatory actions. Everything's online, Miko replied, her fingers flying over the console. Broadcast stations in every system are picking up the data. The syndicate is trying to cover their tracks, but it's too late. The public knows now. But, she paused, scanning another readout. They've started scrambling their communications. They've isolated sectors of the UEC military. And, she glanced up, her voice tight. They've activated their sleeper agents across the galaxy. We're not just dealing with a few people anymore. The syndicate's network runs deeper than we thought. Jack's blood ran cold. They were far from out of the woods. The data they had released was a critical blow. But the syndicate's retaliatory measures were swift. Sleeper agents, operatives embedded in high-level positions across military, corporate, and political factions would now begin to hunt them down. They were fighting a war on two fronts, one in the open and one in the shadows. "We've got to move fast," Jack said, stepping closer to Miko. "What's the next step?" "We need to stay ahead of their counteroffensive," Miko said, her eyes flickering with intensity. "But we also need to secure the final piece, the Syndicate's leadership. The core of their operations is still intact. We need to expose the higher-ups. If we can neutralize them, it's game over." Klein, who had been silently observing from the rear, spoke up. "We've got some high-value targets who could help. Contacts in the underground resistance. They've been preparing for this moment. It's time to call in favors." Jack's gaze hardened. "I've been waiting for this. Let's finish it." The next few days were a blur of tactical meetings, encrypted communications, and covert maneuvers. Klein had reached out to key members of the underground, former soldiers, ex-intelligence agents, hackers, and even politicians who had defected from the UEC's corrupt leadership. Together, they formed a loose but potent alliance, ready to strike at the heart of the Syndicate's power. Their first move was to target a series of heavily fortified bases where the Syndicate's leadership had taken refuge. These bases, once thought to be impenetrable, were now vulnerable. They had been compromised from within. Jack, Klein, and their team moved swiftly, eliminating Syndicate operatives and securing critical intelligence. But just as their forces were gaining momentum, a far darker reality emerged. A transmission came through to the USS Horizon, intercepted and decrypted by Miko. It was a message from an unknown source. The message was simple: "They know you're coming." The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. The Syndicate had always been several steps ahead, but now they were playing a different game. Their knowledge of Jack's movements suggested a network of spies deeper than any they had imagined. "They're tracking us," Jack muttered, eyes narrowing. "They've been tracking us for days. But how?" Miko analyzed the transmission. "It's possible they've inserted surveillance software into our systems. I'll scrub the ship's network and do a deep cleanse. But they may have compromised more than just our communications. We need to be careful." But it was already too late. The USS Horizon was ambushed just as they approached the next target, a high-security space station in orbit around a dying star. Syndicate ships, cloaked and heavily armed, launched a surprise attack. The first blast rocked the USS Horizon, sending it into a wild spin. Alarms blared across the ship, and crew members scrambled to their stations. "Shields are down to 30%, shouted Lieutenant Hawkins, his face tense. "We've got incoming Syndicate dreadnoughts." "Damn it," Klein shouted, slamming a fist into a console. "We've walked right into a trap." "We have to get out of here," Jack said, his voice hard and decisive. "We need to fight back." "Miko, are the comms secure?" "Not yet," she responded, her fingers flying over the console. "But they're trying to isolate us from the rest of the fleet. I can't guarantee how long we'll stay undetected." "Get it done," Jack ordered. "We can't afford to let them cut us off. Not now." The crew of the USS Horizon braced themselves as the ship lurched under another barrage. Jack gritted his teeth, adrenaline flooding his system. They had fought too hard to lose now. "We need to counterattack," Drake said, striding onto the bridge. "We've got fighters, and I've got some heavy artillery loaded. But we're going to need every ship in this sector to help us if we're going to break through." "We don't have time for that," Jack snapped. "Miko, I want you to hack their communications. Take down their fleet's coordination. We need to cause chaos." Klein nodded. "If we disrupt their command structure, we might get a window to escape or counterattack." Jack turned to Drake. "You've got your orders, Commander. Bring us some breathing room." The next few hours were a blur of firefights, dogfights, and desperate countermeasures. The USS Horizon was outgunned, but the Syndicate had underestimated their resilience. Miko's hacking skills turned the tide for a brief moment. Communications within the Syndicate's fleet were thrown into disarray as key systems went offline. Syndicate ships collided, and several were forced to retreat. But the Syndicate wasn't finished. Their retaliatory strike came from an unexpected source. A massive dreadnought, heavily armed, appeared out of nowhere. The ship was a behemoth, a floating fortress of firepower. It opened fire on the USS Horizon, and the shields collapsed under the first few blasts. "Hold together," Jack shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to disable that dreadnought, now." Drake and his squadron of fighters darted in and out of the chaos, targeting the dreadnought's weak points. While Klein coordinated their efforts, Miko scrambled to get their systems back online, working feverishly to get control of the ship's weapons. The fight seemed endless, the odds insurmountable. But Jack had always been a man of resolve, and the fire in his chest burned hotter than ever. As the USS Horizon danced between death and destruction, Jack issued a single order. "Everyone, take the shot." With a deafening roar, the USS Horizon fired everything it had, its weapons lashing out at the Syndicate dreadnought. The massive ship took a direct hit to its main reactor, and for a moment, it seemed like victory might be within reach. Then the entire dreadnought erupted in a burst of light. As the core imploded, the shockwave sent the USS Horizon careening into a nearby asteroid field. But they had done it, the dreadnought was destroyed. Silence fell for a moment, and the crew took a collective breath. But as Jack surveyed the damage to the ship and the aftermath of the battle, he knew it wasn't over. The Syndicate would retaliate. They always did. But now, they had the advantage. The truth was out. The galaxy was watching, and Jack Reeve, ex-Marine and reluctant hero, was more determined than ever to finish what he had started. The war for the galaxy's soul was far from over, but Jack knew one thing: the Syndicate had just lost their strongest weapon, the shadows they had hidden behind. Now, there was nowhere to run.